Now, let's start in early '85, right where we left off in the last episode. We kick things off with Eazy-E. He's 20, and you might be wondering, what did a typical day look like for him? Well, for the younger folks watching, this might come as a surprise. Eazy-E was an early riser. He liked to start his mornings reading the Los Angeles Times. That's where at the end of the year, he will find the inspiration for the name of his future music label. Back then, there were no smartphones. It wasn't seen as some dad hobby like it might be today. If you wanted the latest news, you had to read the paper. It didn't just pop up on your feed like this video did. Well, I hope. Then came one of his favorite morning rituals, unboxing a fresh pair of sneakers. Funny story, when Eazy liked a pair, he wouldn't just buy one. He'd cop every pair they had in his size and roll out with a dolly full of shoe boxes. That might have been what inspired Dr. Dre's famous Air Force One habit. Yeah. For those who don't know, Dre wears a brand new pair of white Air Forces every single day, so I don't know who gave who the habit. But once they linked up again, like you'll see in this episode, they'd hit up Foot Locker together and scoop up the entire store like it was nothing. Fun fact, Eazy liked to keep the price tag on his shoes. Now let's switch back to Eazy's morning routine. So after lacing up a fresh pair of kicks, Eazy would cook his food for the day, check his pager, and get to work. He'd then hop in his car and pop in a tape, usually something from Houdini, since he was a big fan. You'll discover in this episode just how much they inspired him. And then he'd cruise less than a mile over to Atlantic Drive, through the sunny but dangerous streets of Compton. There, he'd pull up to a C-shaped building where he worked his day job. When it came to business, Eazy was sharp, moved smart, calculated, and only worked with people he trusted. Dive even deeper into the origins of the most infamous rap group of all time in the third episode of our animated docuseries. Today in part 3, we're jumping into the years '85 to '87, covering the creation of Ruthless Records, the introduction of Arabian Prince, the formation of the group, and the importance of the Roadium Swap Meet to the Los Angeles underground rap scene. If you're just tuning in, don't worry, you're right on time. I just recommend checking out the first parts by clicking the top right corner of your screen. But if you want to catch up later, here's a quick recap of what happened. In the first 2 episodes, we delved into the early lives of Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, Ren, Yella, and Eazy-E, sharing some untold stories, like how Dre was spinning records at his mom's house parties when he was just 4, and how that passion grew into a neighborhood DJ crew that he started with his childhood friend, Eazy-E. That same Eazy who dropped out of school early and started hanging out in the streets with his big cousin Horace, who took him under his wing. We also explored the formation of Cube's first rap group, the Stereo Crew, with Dr. Dre's younger cousins Jinx, KD, and Barry, and broke down the first releases from the World Class Wreckin Cru, the group Dre and Yella were part of before N.W.A. In this first series of episodes, we'll dive deep into the members' childhoods, the formation of the group, and the events leading up to the release of their debut album. Even though the infamous rap group is known worldwide, yet their origin story remains misunderstood, with a timeline that's often scattered, blurred, and debated to this day. We're honoring the key players who often get overshadowed and uncovering little-known stories, like how the D.O.C moved from Texas to Los Angeles after meeting Dr. Dre, or the story of Krazy Dee, often referred to as the group's forgotten Hispanic member, Arabian Prince's role in the group's first releases, as well as the importance of DJ Cli-N-Tel, Ice Cube's forgotten mentor. Since the tragic loss of his big cousin Horace, Eazy's been questioning his lifestyle, ready for something different. As mentioned in the last episode, he began putting money aside, not just to leave that life behind, but to build something bigger. One day, Eazy-E was hanging out at the Roadium Swap Meet, an open-air flea market that was a hotspot for underground music. There was a Japanese-American guy named Steve Yano who ran a small record stand in the middle of the Roadium. Folks in the community knew this was the place to get the latest music, mixtapes packed with songs so fresh they hadn't even hit the radio yet. No labels, no packaging, just raw, exclusive tracks. His stand played a major role in shaping the Los Angeles underground hip-hop scene. And those mixtapes, they featured freestyle raps from artists who would later become some of the biggest names in the game. 2 of them? Dr. Dre and a young Ice Cube. Steve Yano had recently started working with Dr. Dre. In exchange for some money, or sometime vinyl, Dre would record scratching mixtapes. These tapes are now known as 85 Live, 86 in the Mix, You Got Ganked, Double Up, and others you can still find on YouTube. Dre was putting together 60-minute mixes filled with the hottest rap hits of the moment, all chopped and blended with his signature scratching. Dre's mixing technique was so far ahead of its time that people thought he was using 4 turntables, even though he only had 2. His 85 to 88 Roadium Swap Meet mixes became a massive hit in the underground scene. Steve would show up early in the morning at Dre's aunt's house to record the tapes. That's where Dre was staying at the time, out in South Central, with his little cousin Jinx, who was around 14. Jinx vividly remembers having to choose between going to school or staying with them. As he tells it, that choice was made pretty quickly. He'd help by carrying crates or doing small tasks, and in return, Steve would buy him a meal at Wendy's. Later in '87, Steve Yano was joined by Tony A. the Wizard, an 18-year-old Hispanic DJ who started working with him at the Roadium Swap Meet. As N.W.A started gaining serious momentum, Dre no longer had time to do the mixtapes, so he asked Tony to take over, telling him the group would still come by to lay down verses, he just wouldn't be the one mixing anymore. And that's how a young Tony A ended up witnessing Eazy-E writing his own lyrics when he'd come by to record an 8 or 16 bar verse on his mixtapes. Now back to '85, that was just a little flash forward. At the time, Dre had just moved out of his mom's house in Compton after disagreement about his future. He relocated to his aunt's house in South Central, where his cousin Sir Jinx was living. That move changed everything. Now Ice Cube had unlimited access to Dre. Jinx's house was just 3 doors down. Cube was always hanging out there, knowing Dre would be around. In fact, Cube was so determined to be around Dre that he quit football practice. Because by the time he got home, Dre was already gone, either back at Lonzo's club or another spot in Compton to mix. He even remembers looking out through his window checking for Dre's car, hoping to catch him before he left. Not long after Dre moved to South Central, he and Cube really started clicking, and as mentioned a little earlier, they started recording street mixtapes where Dre would take popular songs of the time and Cube would rewrite the lyrics, giving them a raw and comedic twist. It was just for fun at first, but neither of them knew. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Remember how in the last episode we broke down the story of how Dre and Ice Cube first crossed paths? That story was based on interviews Cube gave. But since then, I got in touch with DJ Domino, one of DJ Cli-N-Tel's closest friends, and a fellow member who joined the Wreckin Cru later on. He felt like I had to share Cli-N-Tel's side of the story, so I got straight back to the research, and yep, his perspective about Dre and Cube's first encounter definitely needs to be shared. Special thanks to DJ Domino for pointing that out. Now, if you don't remember, DJ Cli-N-Tel was part of the Wreckin Cru, Dr. Dre's first group, which we talked about in earlier parts. And to correct what I said in the last part, it was actually Cli-N-Tel, not Dre, who wrote their early hit Surgery. Dre just delivered his first official rap verse on that record, but the writing credit belongs to Cli-N-Tel, as he originally got hired by Lonzo as a rap artist when the Wreckin Cru were transitioning from club DJs to recording artists. So here's his version of how Ice Cube really met Dr. Dre. One day around '84, Cli-N-Tel and Dre were in South Central for a birthday party and swung by Jinx's house. When they arrived, the stereo crew immediately started performing to catch their attention, as they had been waiting for this occasion for a long time now. Jinx jumped behind the turntables while Cube and KD grabbed their mics and immediately started performing. That little kid with the jerry curl? Yup, that was Cube, and he immediately caught their attention. Cli-N-Tel took Dre to the side and told him, "Yo, we need to do something with these kids." Dre wasn't sure. He was worried he didn't have the time to develop them, but Cli-N-Tel convinced him. They brought Cube, Jinx, and KD into their small studio, started working on demos, and taught them everything from recording to stage presence. Cli-N-Tel took Cube under his wing. He saw raw talent in him, helped him sharpen his writing, taught him to emphasize his bars, structure his verses. He really stepped in like a true mentor. And here's a little known story. Dre used Cli-N-Tel's a cappella from the B-side of the Wreckin Cru's song Juice in Boyz-N-The-Hood, along with a sample of Lonzo's Laugh. It's kind of wild that Cli-N-Tel's name rarely gets brought up because he played a real part in the group's origins. So that's why, just like with the D.O.C and Krazy Dee, there will be an episode focused exclusively on him this summer. Now you might be wondering, why are there 2 different versions of the story? Well, like I mentioned in episode 1, the truth is rarely simple, especially when it's buried under nearly 4 decades of memories, media interviews, and retellings that get reshaped or blurred over time. You've got to remember these events happened when they were just teens, and depending on where they're interviewed, especially on big platforms like TV, artists sometimes have to summarize or simplify what really went down. As a fan, I always felt like the history around the group was scattered. Dates here, quotes there, and key names often slept on. It was hard to make sense of it all. That's exactly why I wanted to create this documentary, to bring the full story together in one timeline. This was built from hundreds of interviews, books, and documentaries, doing my best to lay it all out in order and to honor every player who helped shape the legacy of the group. And if any other key players want to share their side of the story, don't hesitate to drop a comment or hit us up on Instagram. And for those of you who enjoy the content, feel free to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. I try to reply to all of them, and every bit of engagement really helps the videos. Now let's switch back to our story. And we're still in '85. Ice Cube started helping the World Class Wreckin Cru with their lyrics. They had just released their debut album, World Class, that same year. At the same time, Cube was also recording mixtapes with his group, Stereo Crew. Cube had the rhymes KD could spit, and Jinx was the DJ. Dre and Cli-N-Tel started bringing them to clubs where they were performing. At first, they just stayed in the DJ booth as roadies carrying crates. Ice Cube reflects on how it was cool for him to start hanging out at 15 with a 19-year-old Dr. Dre, who was starting to make a name for himself in the area with his unique mixing style. Then came the KDAY rap contest, Best Rappers of the West, a multi-round battle with qualifiers held at different spots. The Stereo Crew made it to the finals but came in second because the host messed up their music. Back then, performances relied on cassette tapes. If you had to rewind mid-performance, it completely broke the momentum. Dre, watching from the crowd, had their back. He told them they deserved to win and invited them to perform at D.O.C, which was Lonzo's new club. Wanting to impress Dr. Dre and following his advice to add more humor, they performed a creative remix of Roxanne Roxanne by UTFO, flipping it into a song called Diane Diane, keeping the same cadence but switching up the lyrics. Not long after, they began opening for the Wreckin Cru, which helped them gain exposure. It was those kinds of dirty raps that Dre and Cube recorded at Jinx's house. And as a way to make some extra money, they started selling their street mixtapes to Steve Yano at the Roadium, as mentioned earlier in this episode. And that's how, in '85, Dre reconnected with his childhood friend Eazy-E, who was hanging out at the Roadium buying tapes from Steve Yano. Steve recalls seeing this small guy holding about 20 tapes in his hands, trying to buy them all. At first, Yano thought it had to be a scam. Most kids at his stand barely had enough money to buy 1 or 2 tapes at a time, but this wasn't just anyone. This was Eric Wright, and he wasn't a kid anymore, even though he looked like he was 14. In reality, he was already 20, and things were about to change. He asked him if he was sure he wanted all those records. Eazy-E replied, "Sure," in that high squeaky voice that would later become his trademark sound. Then he reached into his sock, pulled out a stack of bills, and paid up. Yep, you heard that right, in his sock. That's where Eazy always liked to keep his money. Less than a week later, he came back. This time, he asked Steve Yano about a record he had bought, curious about who made it. When he found out it was his childhood friend Andre from Compton, he told Yano to tell Dre. Eric said, "What's up?" Yeah, back in the early '80s, Eazy and Dre formed the high-powered DJ crew while they were still teens, spinning at backyard parties, high school dances, and house parties on the weekends, as mentioned in part 1. And you gotta remember, there were no mobile phones, no social media. If you lost contact, that was it. At first, Yano didn't say anything to Dre. He didn't want to bother him. But a week later, Eazy was back again, still asking about Dre and wanting his number. So, Steve finally asked Dre a few days later if he knew somebody named Eric Wright from Compton. And just like that, Eazy and Dre started clicking again. Eric started popping up at D.O.C, Skateland, and every other spot where Dre and the Wreckin Cru were performing, usually rolling with his homeboy MC Ren. Eazy had been saving up his money, and now he was ready to launch his new business. At first, he thought about opening a record store, but Steve Yano and Dre shut that idea down. They told him if he really wanted to transition into the music business, starting a record label would be a better move, more lucrative, more serious. But at the time, nobody took him seriously. In those days, a lot of guys talked about going straight, but never actually did it. But Eazy was different. As his mother recalls, since he was little, he had always wanted to be somebody, to do something big. So, by late 1985, he officially founded Ruthless Records. At first, though, it was just a name, no walls, no office. And now, he just needed a group to manage. And for the young folks watching, yeah, even though he had a passion for music from a young age, back then, he never saw himself as a rapper. In his mind, there was no world where that would happen. Crazy to think about now, since he's become a full-blown icon of the genre. The name Ruthless Records was inspired by a newspaper ad Eazy saw one morning for the upcoming 1986 movie, Ruthless People. One night, he proudly walked into a club where the Wreckin' Cru were performing, holding a drawing of his new label's logo, Ruthless Records. He showed it to Dr. Dre and Arabian Prince, telling them he wanted them to produce music for him and that he was ready to put the money on the table. At the time, Arabian Prince was making a name for himself as a producer on the West Coast, working with Bobby Jimmy and the Critters, MC Smooth, and others. He had started as a DJ alongside Egyptian Lover and Uncle Jam's Army, one of the most famous DJ crews in LA. Back in '84, Dr. Dre was on tour with the World Class Wreckin Cru when he crossed paths with him, and the two quickly bonded. They would hit the Roadium Swap Meet together, digging for records, and when they weren't doing that, they were hanging out at Venice Beach, talking to girls. Not long after Dre reconnected with Eazy, he introduced him to Arabian Prince. At the time, Arabian Prince started feeling like he wasn't really cashing in on all the records he was producing for other artists. Meanwhile, Dre's vision for the Wreckin' Cru was beginning to clash with Lonzo's. Dre wanted to push for a harder, more street-oriented sound, but Lonzo wanted the group to stay in its electro-funk lane. As Lonzo recalls, when he first opened Eve After Dark in 1979, LA's music scene had more of a disco electro-techno vibe. By the mid-'80s, fun party-style rap had taken over the city, but by the '90s, the sound had completely shifted to gangsta rap. In 1986, the Wreckin' Cru released their second album, Wrapped in Romance, but it didn't pull strong numbers. By then, Dre was officially done with the electro dance sound. Slowly but surely, Dre and Arabian Prince started taking Eazy-E's offer more seriously. But at that point, it was just talk, until Dre ran into some trouble. He had built up a stack of unpaid parking tickets, and eventually it caught up with him. He got locked up and needed bail money. Eazy-E heard about the situation and stepped in to help. To return the favor, Dre finally agreed to produce music for Eazy. And that's when he told Eazy about a rap trio he had met earlier that year, straight out of the East Coast, Homeboys Only. Eazy was all in. He then commissioned a 16-year-old Ice Cube to write a song for them. His only instructions? Write it like one of those crazy tracks you do for the street mixtapes with Dre. So Cube did, and that's why the song is titled Boyz-N-The-Hood, a reference to the rap trio's name. At the same time, the Stereo Crew, Ice Cube's rap group with Sir Jinx and KD, released their single, She's a Skag. They secured the opportunity through Lonzo and the Wreckin' Cru, who had landed a deal with CBS Epic Records and helped his group secure a one-track record deal. He co-produced She's a Skag with Dre, but the single didn't perform well commercially, and the group was dropped from the label. Ironically, a portion of the song ended up in Michael Jackson's 1987 music video, Bad, proving that even short-lived projects can leave a mark. Not long after, the group rebranded as C.I.A. under Dre's advice. Originally, the name stood for Criminals in Action, but it was later changed to Cru in Action to be more marketable and industry-friendly. This shift reflected a growing trend in hip-hop, where acronym-based names started becoming more common. As a fan of N.W.A, you probably already know this part of the story. The group Homeboys Only was originally set to record Boyz-N-The-Hood, but they didn't connect with the lyrics. Coming from the East Coast, the references and style didn't resonate with them. They ultimately turned down the song, believing it didn't fit their vision. According to Ice Cube, tension started building in the studio when the group began making remarks about the lyrics he wrote and the West Coast slang he used, comments he didn't appreciate. With Homeboys Only out, Dre proposed an unexpected solution. Eazy should record it himself. He saw potential in Eazy's high-pitched, distinct voice, believing it could make the song stand out. Eazy wasn't convinced. He insisted he wasn't a rapper and thought the idea was a joke, but Dre wasn't letting him off the hook. He reminded Eazy that the studio time was already paid for and teased him about being scared of the microphone. At the time, Ice Cube couldn't record the track. He was still part of C.I.A. and signed to Cru Cut Records. Now y'all might be thinking, why not just ask Ren? He was already hanging with Eazy and knew how to rap. Well, I tried to find the answer, but none of the members ever got asked that in interviews. They usually ask Cube why he didn't rap it himself, since he wrote the song. With no other option, Eazy finally agreed. It was time for him to step into the booth. He asked to turn off the studio lights and, of course, put on his trademark locks before recording. Once he started rapping, his delivery was completely off-tempo. Ice Cube couldn't help but laugh. Dre and Eazy, frustrated, told Cube to leave the studio so they could focus. Cube recalls coming back the next day and seeing that only half a verse had been recorded. Dre had to record Eazy one line at a time. 3 days later, Dre called him up, saying they had finally finished the track and invited him to come listen. After the track played, Cube looked over at Eazy, who still seemed unsure about it. Eazy hesitated before asking if it sounded all right. Cube didn't hesitate. He told him it was a hit. But now, Eazy-E needed a rap name. The origins of his name aren't entirely clear, but some sources suggest he was inspired by the Houdini song, Big Mouth. I guess he also took inspiration from the font Houdini used on their album covers for the Ruthless Records projects. I mean, just look. You can definitely see the similarities. He was a die-hard fan of the group. He used to bump their songs all the time. Eazy then went to Macola Records, a company specializing in manufacturing and distributing independent electro and hip-hop labels. At the time, pressing 1,000 records cost just $500, a small investment for what would soon become a major career move. With a recording tape of Boyz-N-The-Hood in one hand and a sheet of paper listing Ruthless Records as his label in the other, Eazy had no idea this was the first step in his journey to becoming a rap icon. To promote the single, they left boxes filled with cassette tapes of Boyz-N-The-Hood outside every record shop. Each box had a card with a pager number. Whenever it beeped, they knew it was time to drop off another batch. And on top of that, MC Chip recalls how they hit every corner of the city, handing out free copies to make sure everyone knew Eazy-E's name. Yeah, marketing was a little different back in the day. Special shout out to MC Chip for his positive feedback and the insights he shared in the comments section of our last episode, where we talked about MC Ren's early rap crews back in his high school days. Steve Yano immediately called back Eazy and Dre after playing Boyz-N-The-Hood at the Roadium Swap Meet for the first time. The reaction was instant. The crowd was breakdancing. The excitement was undeniable. People were vibing to it. Recorded in late '86, the song quickly became a local hit and was officially released in 1987. To this day, the exact number of copies sold remains unknown. Many were sold directly out of car trunks, bypassing traditional distribution. But one thing was clear, the buzz was undeniable. Back then, if you wanted to know if a song was taking off, you didn't need charts or radio spins. All you had to do was listen to the streets. Cars driving by, stereos blasting. Everybody had to buy their tapes or vinyl, and Boyz-N-The-Hood was everywhere. Most radio stations wouldn't play the record due to the explicit lyrics, except for 1580 KDAY. Greg Mack, one of the station's key figures, kept hearing the song everywhere in the city and decided to give it a shot by playing a clean version. It didn't take long. It became the most requested song on the station. Yeah, I know I'm repeating myself, but for the younger listeners, there was no internet back then. If you wanted to hear a song, you had to call the radio station and request it. Yep, that was the thing. The success of his solo single Boyz-N-The-Hood was the final push for Eazy to form a local all-star supergroup. At the time, the group's lineup wasn't as clearly defined as it is today. Eazy didn't see N.W.A as a traditional group at first. It was more of a collective with different acts performing under one name. That's why you can see 12 guys on the cover of their first EP, Panic Zone, released later in 1987. Not saying all of them were meant to become official members, but it gives you a glimpse of the original idea. Now, if you flip to the back cover, you'll find 2 photos showing what Eazy-E envisioned as the group's core founding members at that point, which consisted of Arabian Prince, Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, and Ice Cube. But there's one more name you need to know, someone who was directly involved in N.W.A's very first release. His name is Krazy Dee. He actually wrote the title track of their first EP, Panic Zone, which was originally called Hispanic Zone. Even though he doesn't appear in the back photo on the EP cover, his name is credited right alongside the 4 founding members. But he does appear on the front cover though, and stands out as the only Hispanic dude in it. You'll discover in the special episode focused exclusively on him, which will be released in just 2 weeks, how his role went far beyond just appearing on the cover of the group's first EP, breaking down how he was part of the original Ruthless family in '86, just like Eazy-E's childhood friend Ron-De-Vu, who we talked about in part 1. Yep, because not many people know that the first artist Eazy-E ever featured on a track wasn't even a member of N.W.A. Right after launching Ruthless Records, Eazy brought Ron into the studio during the recording process of Boyz-N-The-Hood. They recorded 2 singles together, Fat Girl and L.A. is the Place, both produced by Dre. In some pressings, these tracks were released as the B-side of Boyz-N-The-Hood. But Ron-De-Vu wasn't really a rapper. He was just Eazy's homie. Like Eazy, his lyrics were also written by Ice Cube, but he never pursued a rap career. At the time, Yella and Ren hadn't joined yet. Neither had the D.O.C, and don't worry, we haven't forgotten about him. We'll introduce him at the right time. He'll even have a special episode focused exclusively on him. Even though Ren appears on the EP cover, as mentioned in the last part, he was originally signed as a standalone artist. Not long after Eazy-E dropped his solo track Boyz-N-The-Hood, the group began to take shape, and that's when they started searching for the right name. Strangely enough, it's a story that doesn't get brought up often in interviews, and confirming details across sources has been tricky. But what is known is that Dre and Eazy were at Arabian Prince's house when someone, most likely Eazy, came up with the now infamous name N.W.A. Ice Cube wasn't there when the name was decided. So later that night, Eazy and Dre picked him up, excited to share that they had finally chosen a name for the group. When they told him the name, Cube's first reaction was disappointment. He thought it sounded whack. But the moment they explained what it stood for, something clicked. His whole perspective changed. He realized just how powerful and ingenious the name truly was. Krazy Dee also shared a little-known story. Before founding N.W.A, one of the group's first name ideas was Underworld. He even referenced it in the title track he wrote for their first EP, Panic Zone. During the same time, Eazy and N.W.A were locked in the studio, recording a ton of material for Ruthless Records. Eazy's parents' garage became the official HQ for Ruthless Records, but before officially releasing their music, they tested their tracks on the streets through Steve Yano at the Roadium Swap Meet. They started distributing street mixtapes, using them as a testing ground to gauge listener reactions. Mixtapes and DJs have always been the backbone of hip-hop. These tapes featured early N.W.A recordings, giving the crew real-time feedback on what was hitting and what wasn't. When tracks like Man and 8 started buzzing, they knew they had something special. They had found their niche. Those became the singles that put N.W.A on the map and were officially released on their first EP, Panic Zone, later that year. And about a year and a half later, some of those early tracks would be remixed and resurfaced on their official debut album, Straight Outta Compton. But for all that to happen, for the group to go from local buzz to worldwide fame, Eazy needed to expand, and for that he needed a manager. Taking Dre's advice, he set his sights on Jerry Heller, who was already managing the World Class Wreckin Cru. Yes, by the way, some of you have been wondering why I never mentioned N.W.A and the Posse as their debut album. Well, it's actually an unauthorized compilation album released by Macola Records, who decided to cash in on the group after Eazy and Jerry Heller left and signed a new distribution deal with Priority Records. Macola ended up reusing the cover from N.W.A's first EP for the Posse compilation album. But don't worry, we'll get into that story in the following part. Alright fam, that wraps up today's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. In the next episode, we'll explore how Eazy-E crossed paths with Jerry Heller, follow the D.O.C's move from Texas to Los Angeles after connecting with Dr. Dre, and of course we'll break down how J.J. Fad's album, the first gold record on Ruthless, helped finance Eazy Does It and Straight Outta Compton. We'll also finally uncover Krazy Dee's story, who is often referred to as the group's forgotten Hispanic member. So stay tuned and hit the notification bell, as the 4th episode will drop in the following weeks. And for short animated stories and the latest old school hip hop news, make sure to follow us on Instagram, just like your favorite rappers already did. If you don't know, we're pretty active on here and are publishing short animated interview clips in collaboration with major hip hop outlets in the game. For those who want to show a little support, as these documentaries take a ton of time, research, and effort to put together, YouTube thanks and memberships are now available. Big love to everyone who stuck around till now. Peace out, and see you real soon for part 4. And get ready for a series of short extended episodes, each one focusing on a key figure who played a major role in the group's origins. To the ones who stayed until now, here's a sneak peek of the first one, dropping in just 2 weeks. Like previously said, it will be focused on Krazy Dee, breaking down how his role went far beyond just appearing on the cover of the group's first EP. I'll take you through his journey, explaining how he was part of the original Ruthless family back in '86, exploring his early connection with Cypress Hill, Eazy-E's love for the Mexican community, Dr. Dre and Krazy Dee's deep bond, as well as the rare unreleased party-style N.W.A material he still has, and the real reasons behind his departure. These will be extended episodes tied directly to our animated docuseries, N.W.A Origins. a bonus series highlighting the overlooked key figures who played a role in the group's rise. I'm planning to release a couple of them. Like I told y'all from the jump, we're diving real deep into the group's story that helped define the blueprint for rappers to this day.